welcome to what is the 13th story from the Mammoth Book of Haunted House Stories. We begin a new section tonight, section 3, Shadowy Corners, Accounts of Restless Spirits. And tonight's story is called the Ankardyne Pew by William Friar Harvey, and the address is Ankardyne House at Garvington in Worcestershire in England. It's an early 18th century gentleman's residence, imposing building with numerous rooms and servants' quarters. It has exceptional views across the neighbouring fens. The house is also linked to the local church by an underground flagged passageway. And it's February 1890, and William Friar Harvey, 1885 to 1937. So he would have only been about 52 when he died. He was born in Yorkshire, educated at Balliol College, Oxford, and won a medal for gallantry during World War I. He is best remembered for a single much anthologised and filmed horror story, The Beast with Five Fingers. Despite having written numerous other weird stories collected in The Beast with Five Fingers, 1928, Midnight Tales, 1946, posthumously published, and The Arm of Mrs. Egan, 1952. Houses and inns disturbed by ghosts occur in several of his tales, notably The Heart of the Fire, Midnight House, and tonight's story, The Ankardyne Pew, which describes the events at an old mansion haunted by the most ominous noises and sounds. The following narrative of the occurrences that took place at Ankardyne House in February 1890 is made up chiefly of extracts from letters written by my friend the Reverend Thomas Prendergast to his wife immediately before taking up residence at the vicarage, together with transcripts from the diary which I kept at the time. The names throughout are, of course, fictitious. February 9th. I am sorry that I had no opportunity yesterday of getting over to the vicarage, so your questions, I have not lost the list, must remain unanswered. It is almost a quarter of a mile away from the church in the village. You see, the church, unfortunately, is in the grounds of the park, and there is a flagged passage, cold and horribly draughty, that leads from Ankardyne House to the great loose box of the Ankardyne Pew. The squires in the old days could come in late and go out early, or even stay away altogether without anyone being the wiser. The whole situation of the church is bad and typically English. The house of God in the squire's pocket. Why should he have right of secret access? I haven't had time to examine the interior even, early 18th century I should guess. But as we drove up last evening in the dusk, the tall gloomy facade of Ankardyne House with the elegant little church, a wren's nest, adjoining it, made me think of a wicked uncle setting off for a walk in the woods with one of the babes. The picture is really rather apt, as you will agree when you see the place. It's partly a question of the height of the two buildings, partly a question of the shape of the windows, those of the one square, deep-set and grim, of the other round, the raised eyebrows of startled innocence. We were quite wrong about Miss Ankardyne. She is a charming little lady, not a trace of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and is really looking forward to having you as her nearest neighbour. I will write more of her tomorrow, but the stable clock has struck 11 and my candle is burning low. February 10th. I measured the rooms as you asked me to. They are, of course, larger than ours at Garvington and will swallow all our furniture and carpets. But you will like the vicarage. It at least is a cheerful house, faces south and isn't like this place surrounded by woods. I suppose familiarity with the skies and wide horizons of the fens accounts for the shut-in feeling one gets here, but I have never seen such cedars. And now to describe Miss Ankardyne. She is perhaps 75, petite and bird-like, with the graceful alert poise of a bird. I should say that sight and hearing are abnormally acute and have helped to keep her young. She is a good talker, well-read and interested in affairs, and a still better listener. Parson's pride, you will exclaim, since we are only two, and if she listens, I must talk. But I mean what I say. All that the Archdeacon told us is true. You are conscious in her presence of a living spirit of peace. By the way, she is an interesting example of your theory that there are some people for whom animals have an instinctive dislike. Indeed, the best example I have met. For Miss Ankardyne tells me that, though since childhood, she has had a fondness for all living creatures, especially for birds. It is one which is not at first reciprocated. She can, after assiduous, continuous persevering, win their affection. Her spaniel, her parrot, and Kaka, the tortoise-shell cat, are obviously attached to her, but strange dogs snarl if she attempts to, the words fondle them, I'd say stroke them. And she tells me that when she goes to the farm to feed the fowls, the birds seem to sense her coming and run from the scattered corn. I have heard of cows showing this antipathy to individuals, but never before of birds. There is an excellent library here that badly needs cataloguing. The old vicar had, I believe, begun the task at the time of his fatal seizure. I have been inside the church. Anything less like dear old Garvington it would be impossible to find. Architecturally it has its points, but the unity of design on which everything here depends is broken by the Ankardyne Pew. Its privacy is an abomination. Even from the pulpit it is impossible to see inside, and I can well believe the stories of the Dicing squires and their Sunday play. Miss Ankardyne refuses to use it. The glass is crude and uninteresting, but there is an uncommon chancel screen of Spanish workmanship, which somehow seems in keeping with the place. I wish it didn't. We shall miss the old familiar monuments. There is no snub-nosed crusader here, no worthy Elizabethan knight like our Sir John Parkington, kneeling in supplication with those nicely balanced families on right and left. The tombs are nearly all Ankardyne tombs, urns, weeping charities, disconsolate relics, and all the cold Christian virtues. You know the sort. The 10 Commandments are painted on oak panels on either side of the altar. From the Ankardyne Pew, I doubt if you can see them. February the 11th. You ask about my neuritis. It is better despite the fact that I have been sleeping badly. I wake up in the morning, sometimes during the night, with a burning headache and a curious tingling feeling about the tongue, which I can only attribute to indigestion. I am trying the effect of a glass of hot water before retiring. When we move into the vicarage, we shall at least be spared the attention of the owls, which make the nights so dismal here. The place is far too shut in by trees, and I suppose, too, that the disused outbuildings give them shelter. Cats are bad enough, but I prefer the sound of night walkers to night flyers. It won't be long now before we meet. They are getting on splendidly with the vicarage. The painters have already started work. The new kitchen range has come, and is only waiting for the plumbers to put it in. Miss Ankardyne is leaving for a visit to friends in a few days' time. It seems that she always goes away about this season of the year. Wise woman. So I shall be alone next week. She said Dr. Holst would be glad to put me up if I find the solitude oppressive, but I shan't trouble him. You would like the old butler. His name is Mason, and his wife, a Scotch woman, acts as housekeeper. The 3 maids are sisters. They have been with Miss Ankardyne for 30 years, and are everything that maids should be. They belong to the peculiar people. I cannot desire that they should be orthodox. if I could be sure that Dr. Hulse was as well served. The peculiar people there's a peculiar Baptist, strict Baptist, something like that. February 13th. I had an experience last night which moved me strangely. I hardly know what to make of it. I went to bed at 10:30 after a quiet evening with Miss Ankardyne. I thought she seemed in rather poor spirits and tried to cheer her by reading aloud. She chose a chapter from the Vicar of Wakefield. I awoke soon after 1 with an intolerable feeling of oppression, almost of dread. I was conscious too, and in some way my alarm was associated with this, of a burning tingling, piercing pain in my tongue. I got up from bed and was about to pour myself out a glass of water when I heard the sound of someone speaking. The voice was low and continuous and seemed to come from an adjoining room. I slipped on my dressing gown and, candle in hand, went out into the corridor. For a moment I stood in silence. Frankly, I was afraid. The voice proceeded from a room 2 doors away from mine. As I listened, I recognised it as Miss Ankardyne's. She was repeating the Benedicite. I think that's the Blessed be the Lord God of Israel. There were such depths of sadness, so much of the weariness of defeat in this song of triumph of the 3 children saved from the furnace of fire, that I felt I could not leave her. I should have spoken before knocking, for I could almost feel that gasp of fear. "Oh, no," she said. "Oh, no, not now." And then, as if bracing herself for a great effort, "Who is it?" I told her, and she bade me enter. The poor little woman had risen from her knees and was trembling from head to foot. I spent about an hour with her and left her sleeping peacefully. I did not wish to rouse the house, but I managed to find the Mason's room and arranged for Mrs. Mason to sit by the old lady. I can't say what happened in that hour we spent together in talk and in prayer. There is something very horrible about this house that Miss Ankardyne is dimly aware of. Something connected with pain and fire and a bird, and something that was human too. I was shaken to the very depths of my being. I don't think I ever felt the need for prayer and the power of prayer as I did last night. The stable clock has just struck 5. February 14th. I have arranged for Miss Ankardyne to go away tomorrow. She is fit to travel and is hardly fit to stay. I had a long talk with her this morning. I think she is the most courageous woman I know. All her life she has felt that the house is haunted, and all her life she has felt pity for that which haunts it. She says that she is sure that she is living it down, that the house is better than it was, but at this season of the year it is almost too much for her. She is anxious that I should stay with Dr. Hulse. I feel, however, that I must see this business through. She then suggested that I should invite a friend to stay with me. I thought of Pello. You remember how we were obliged to postpone his visit last September? I had a letter from him only last Friday. He is living in this part of the world and could probably run over for a day or 2. The extracts from Mr. Prendergast's letters end here. The following are excerpts from my diary. February 16th. Arrived at Ankardyne House at midday. Prendergast had meant to meet me at the station, but had been suddenly called away to visit a dying parishioner. I had, in consequence, a couple of hours by myself in which to form an impression of the place. The house dates from the early 18th century. It is dignified, though sombre, and is closely surrounded on 3 sides by shrubberies, a rhododendrons and laurel that merge into thick woods. The cedars in the park must be older than any of the buildings. Miss Ankardyne, I gather, has lived here all her life, and the house gives you the impression of having been lived in, a slightly sinister mansion, well aired by a kindly soul. There is a library that should be well worth exploring. The family portraits are in the dining room. None are of outstanding interest. The most unusual feature of the house is its connection with the church, which has many of the characteristics of a private chapel. It does not actually abut on the building, but is joined to it by a low curved facade unpierced by windows. A corridor, lighted from above, runs behind the facade and gives a private entry from the house to the church. The door into this corridor opens into the spacious hall of Ankardyne House, but there is a second mode of access, of which Prendergast seemed unaware, from Miss Ankardyne's bedchamber down a narrow stair. This door is kept locked, and has never been opened as far as Mason the butler can recollect. The church, with the curved facade connecting it to the house, is balanced on the other side by the coach house and stables, which can be approached in a similar manner from the kitchens. The architect has certainly succeeded in conveying the idea that religion and horseflesh can be made elegant adjuncts to the life of a country gentleman. Prendergast came in just before luncheon. He does not look well, and was obviously glad to see me and to unburden himself. In the afternoon I had a long talk with Mason the butler, a very level-headed man. From what Prendergast tells me, I gather that Miss Ankardyne's experiences have been both auditory and visual. They are certainly vague. Auditory? The cry of a bird. Sometimes she thinks it is an owl, sometimes a cockerel. Sometimes a human cry with something bird-like in it. This she has heard almost as long as she can remember, both outside the house and inside her room, but most frequently in the direction of the corridor that leads to the church. The cry is chiefly heard at night, hardly ever before dusk. This would point to an owl. It has become less frequent of recent years, but at this particular season is most persistent. Mason confirms this. He doesn't like the sound and doesn't know what to make of it. The maids believe that it is an evil spirit, but, as it can have no power over them, they belong to the peculiar people, they take no notice of it. Visual and sensory. From time to time, less frequently again of recent years, Miss Ankardyne wakes up with her eyes balls of fire. She can distinguish nothing clearly for several minutes. Then the red spheres slowly contract to pinpricks. There is a moment of sharp pain, and normal vision is restored. At other times she is aroused from sleep by a sharp piercing pain in her tongue. She has consulted several oculists who find that her sight is perfectly normal. I believe she has never known a day's illness. Prendergast seems to have had a similar, though less vivid experience. He used the term burning headache. I have elicited from Mason the statement that animals dislike the house, with the exception of Kaka, Miss Ankardyne's cat, who seems entirely unaffected. The spaniel refuses to sleep in Miss Ankardyne's bedroom, and on one occasion, when the parrot's cage was brought up there, the bird fell into such a screaming fit that it nearly brought the house down. This, I believe, for I tried the experiment myself with the reluctant consent of Mrs. Mason. The feathers of the bird lay back flat on its head and neck with rage, and then it began to shriek in a really horrible way. All this, of course, is very vague. We have no real evidence of anything supernatural. What impresses me most is the influence of the house on a woman of Miss Ankardyne's high character and courage. February 18th. Certainly an interesting night. After a long walk with Prendergast in the afternoon, I went to bed early with a volume of Trollope and a long candle. I did what I have never done before, fell asleep with the candle burning. When I awoke it was within an inch of the socket. The fire had settled into a dull glow. Close to the candlestick on the table by my bedside stood a carafe of water. As I lay in bed, too sleepy to move, I was conscious of the hypnotic effect induced by gazing into a crystal. Slowly the surface of the glass grew dim and then gradually cleared from the centre. I was looking into the interior of a building which I at once recognised as Ankardyne Church. I could make out the screen and the Ankardyne Pew. It seemed to be night, though I could see more clearly than if it had been night. The monuments in the aisle, for example. There were not as many as there are now. Presently the door of the Ankardyne Pew opened, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in black coat and knee breeches, such as a clergyman might have worn a century or more ago. In one hand he held a lighted candle, the flame of which he sheltered with the other. I judged him to be of middle age. His face wore an expression of extreme apprehension. He crossed the church, casting backward glances as he went, and stopped before one of the mural monuments in the south aisle. Then, placing his candle on the ground, he drew from his pocket a hammer and some tools, and kneeling on the ground began to work feverishly at the base of the inscription. When he had finished, and the task was not long, he seemed to moisten a finger, and, running it along the floor, rubbed the dust into the newly cut stone. He then picked up his tools and began to retrace his steps, but the wind seemed to have risen. He had difficulty in shielding the flame of the candle, and just before he regained the door of the Ankardyne Pew, it went out. That was all that I saw in the crystal. I was now wide awake. I got out of bed, put fresh fuel on the fire, and wrote this account in my diary while the picture was still vivid. February 19th. Slept splendidly despite the fact that I was prepared to spend a wakeful night. After a late breakfast, I went with Prendergast into the church and had no difficulty in identifying the monument. It is in the east end of the south aisle, immediately opposite the Ankardyne Pew and partly hidden by the American organ. The inscription reads, "In memory of Francis Ankardyne, Esquire, of Ankardyne Hall in the county of Worcester, late captain in His Majesty's 42nd Regiment of Foot. He departed this life 27th of February 1781, Revelation 14, verses 12 and 13. I brought the Bible from the lectern. Here are lives, said Prendergast, which can fitly be commemorated by such verses. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God. Miss Ankardyne's is one, and I suppose, he added, that there may be some of whom the 11th verse is true. He read it out to me. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth for ever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. I thought at first that he was right, that the 12 might originally have been engraved as 11. But closer scrutiny showed that, though some of the figures had certainly been tampered with, it was not either the 2 or the 3. Prendergast hit on what I believe is the right solution. The R, he said, has been superimposed on an L, and the I was originally 5. The reference is to Leviticus 14, 52, 53. If he is correct, we have still far to go. I have read and reread those verses so often during the day that I can write them down from memory. And he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, and with the running water, and with the living bird, and with the cedar wood, and with the hyssop, and with the scarlet. But he shall let go the living bird out of the city into the open fields, and make an atonement for the house, and it shall be clean." Miss Ankardyne told Prendergast that she was dimly aware of something connected with pain and fire and a bird. It is at least a curious coincidence. Mason knows nothing about Francis Ankardyne except his name. He tells me that the Ankardyne squires of 100 years ago had a reputation for evil living, in that, of course, they were not peculiar. Spent the afternoon in the library in a rather fruitless search for clues. I found 2 books with the name Francis Ankardyne written on the flyleaf. It was perhaps just as well that they should be tucked away on one of the upper shelves. One was inscribed as the gift of his cousin, Cotter Crawley. Query, who is Crawley, and can he be identified with my man in black? I tried to reproduce the crystal gazing under conditions similar to those of the other night, but without success. I have twice heard the bird. It might be either an owl or a cock. The sound seemed to come from outside the house and was not pleasant. February 19th. Tomorrow Prendergast moves into the vicarage and I return home. Miss Ankardyne prolongs her stay at Malvern for another fortnight, and is then to visit friends on the south coast. I should like to have seen and questioned her, and so have discovered something more of the family history. Both Prendergast and I are disappointed. It seemed as if we were on the point of solving the mystery, and now it is as dark as ever. This new society in which Myers is interested should investigate the place. So ends my diary, but not the story. Some 4 months after the events narrated, I managed to secure for a second-hand book dealer 4 bound volumes of the Gentleman's Magazine. They had belonged to a Reverend Charles Phipson, once Fellow of Brasenose College and incumbent of Norton-on-the-Wolds. One evening, as I was glancing through them at my leisure, I came upon the following passage under the date April 1789. At Tottenham, John Ardennoith, Esquire, a young man of large fortune, and in the splendour of his carriages and horses rivalled by few country gentlemen. His table was that of hospitality, where it may be said he sacrificed too much to conviviality, but if he had his foibles, he had his merits also, that far outweighed them. Mr. A was very fond of cock-fighting, and had a favourite cock upon which he won many profitable matches. The last bet he laid upon this cock he lost, which so enraged him that he had the bird tied to a spit and roasted alive before a large fire. The screams of the miserable bird were so affecting that some gentlemen who were present attempted to interfere, which so enraged Mr. A that he seized a poker, and with the most furious vehemence declared that he would kill the first man who interposed. But in the midst of his passionate asseverations he fell down dead upon the spot. Such, we are assured, were the circumstances which attended the death of this great pillar of humanity. Beneath was written, see also the narrative of Mr. C at the end of this volume. I give the story as I found it, inscribed in minute handwriting on the terminal fly-leaves. During his last illness, the Reverend Mr. C gave me the following account of a similar instance of divine judgment. Mr. A of A House in the country of W was notorious for his open practice of infidelity. He was an ardent votary of the chase, a reckless gamester, and was an enthusiast in his love of cockfighting. After carousing one evening with a boon companion, he proposed that they should then and there match the birds which they had entered for a contest on the morrow. His friend declaring that his bird should fight only in a cockpit, Mr. A announced that he had one adjoining the very room in which they were. The birds were brought, lights called for, and Mr. A, opening the door, led his guests down a flight of stairs and along a corridor to what he at first supposed were the stables. It was only after the match had begun that he realized to his horror that they were in the family pew of A Church, to which A House had private access. His expostulations only enraged his host, who commenced to blaspheme, wagering his very soul on the success of his bird, the victor of 50 fights. On this occasion the cock was defeated. Beside himself with frenzy, Mr. A rushed back to his bedchamber, and declaring that the judgment day had come, and that the bird should never crow again, thrust a wire into the embers, burned out its eyes, and bored through its tongue. He then fell down in some form of apoplectic fit. He recovered and continued his frenzied course of living for some years. It was noticed, however, that he had an impediment in his speech, especially remarkable when he was enraged, the effect of which was to make him utter a sound like the crowing of a cock. It became a cant phrase in the neighbourhood. When A crows, honest men must move. 2 years after this awful occurrence his sight began to fail. He was killed in the hunting field. His horse took fright, and bolting, carried him for over a mile across bad country to break his neck in an attempt to leap a 10-foot wall. At each obstacle they encountered, Mr. A called out, but the noise that came from his throat only seemed to terrify his horse the more. Mr. C vouches for the truth of the story, having had personal acquaintance with both the parties. The supposition that the Reverend Mr. C was none other than the boon companion of Francis Ankardyne did not seem to occur to the mind of the worthy Mr. Phipson. That such was the case, I have no doubt. I saw him once in a glass darkly, and I saw later at Ankardyne House a silhouette of Cotter Crawley in an old album, and recognised the weak, foolish profile. Who it was who drew up the wording of the monument in Ankardyne Church I do not know. Probably the trustees of the heir, a distant kinsman and a mere boy? Perhaps the mason mistook the R for an L, the 1 for a 5? Perhaps he was a grim jester. Perhaps the dead man guided the chisel. But I can picture the horror of Cotter Crowley in being confronted with those suggestive verses. I see him stealing from the house, which after years of absence he has brought himself to revisit at night. I see him at work, cold yet feverish on the telltale stone. I see him stricken by remorse and praying, as the publican prayed without in the shadow. Part of this story Prendergast and I told to Miss Ankardyne. The family pew is pulled down, and of the passage that connected the church with the house, only the facade is left. The house itself is quieter than it has been for years. A nephew of Miss Ankardyne from India is coming to live there soon. He has children, but I do not think there is anything of which they need be afraid. As I wrote before, it has been well aired by a kindly soul.